a long time. I've been asked by International Blind Sport Association to deliver a coaching seminar last year in Chile for South American countries, and I did that, and I had to prepare a long presentation that was a 3 days long coaching course, including over 20 blind athletes as well, and over 20 coaches from different countries. And that material that I had to prepare for that course, I used to prepare this presentation today. I have to tell you that what I'm sharing with you is the result of my experience working for the past 10 years as a coach with the Canadian Paralympic program, as well as the learning that I've acquired by contacting and living in the Paralympic world and having a contact and good relationship with several coaches from countries of somewhat similar socio-cultural reality as we are living in Canada with. So what I share with you is my experience and experiences of other people from different countries. And I will start with the presentation. IPSA is the International Blind Sport Association acronym, and I will go with the presentation relatively fast. I'm not going to read everything that you are going to see on your screen because, again, this presentation in PDF format will be available to you later on online. And at any time you find it, if you find it interesting, you will be able to reach back to on your Judo Canada website and see what this presentation offers. So what I will try to share with you, I'll divide it into a number of different smaller chapters: introduction to what it is, the Paralympic Judo, a little bit of information about current classification, a little bit of information on long-term development model of judo. I hear someone talking, so if I would, I ask once again, please mute your mics during the presentation.
Am I muted?
And then, yeah, I think it's Mike Hinney, yeah. Hello. Now we are okay. So we will go further to Road to Compassion, as I call it, being the Paralympic Judoka and being a coach of Paralympic Judoka, then a little bit about teaching principles of Paralympic Judoka as I see it and as I learned from coaches from different countries, and eventually coaching Paralympic Judoka, and then a little bit of tips. I'll try to keep it interesting and share some of funny experiences that I've had with working with the Paralympic program. And again, we have a Paralympian sitting with us together, Tony Walby, who is part of the small Paralympic Judoka program that we have in Canada, we had. A little bit of history. Judo was introduced into Paralympic program in 1988, and that was male program only. In 2004, female judo program was introduced at the Paralympic Games in Athens. From 2007, judo is also part of the Pan Am Games. To date, 12 Paralympic judoka represented Canada at the international stage. If you look at the fact that this is already 35 years, that means that we are really relatively small program that should start. You know, we should really try to expand our program beyond what we have it right now. Of these 12 people, 9 were males and 3 were females. To date, Canadians won 5 Paralympic medals and 4 World Championships medals. Those 5 Paralympic medals were won in the first initial Paralympic Games by Morton brothers. Pierre Morton then continued to win another medal 4 years later and another medal 8 years later. The last performance that he had was in the Paralympic Games in Sydney, Australia, and he retired after that. 4 World Championships medals were won, 2 by William Morgan and 2 by Priscilla Gagné very recently. Interesting fact about all of those athletes is that out of the 12 athletes that ever represented Canada in the international stage, and that includes Tony Wolby, who is with us today, out of those 12 athletes, 8 of them had experienced the first connection with judo or other sport programs at the Ross Macdonald Residential School for Blind in Brantford, Ontario. That means that this was the program that actually produced potential for their Paralympic athletes for judo. The other 4 athletes were accidental arrival to our sport. Tony Wolby was one of them. Tony Wolby was a member of our national team, heavyweight national champion, who discovered his genetic disorder relatively late in life and lost his vision in his late 20s. And now he is blind, J1 athlete. And so accidental arrival of Tony Wolby. There were 2 athletes from British Columbia who accidentally arrived to our program. But again, I must say that we should as a nation, try to encourage much greater participation of Paralympic athletes, Paralympic judoka in our programs, because we have a lot of visually impaired and blind people who are practicing judo but never were involved in our programs. If you want to know the names of the people who were representing Canada, those are Pierre and Eddie Morton, William Morgan, Alex Radoman, Timothy Rees, Tony Wolby, Justin Karn, Stefan Gignac, and females Christina Mowat, Priscilla Gagne, and Michelle Jorgensen. Coaches of the Paralympic program from the 1988 were always selected based on the fact that they were working personally with athletes who were blind or visually impaired. And for that reason, the first plus 20 plus years of our Paralympic program was always run on voluntary basis by coaches that were Timothy Rees, Timothy Laidler from British Columbia, who worked with Morton Brothers, Rene Hock, who lived at that time in British Columbia, and she was diligent to the extent that she learned sign language to be able to communicate with Pierre Morton, who was not blind but also deaf, was totally blind and deaf, and Rene Hock was so dedicated that she learned sign language in order to be able to coach this athlete. There are several clubs and several coaches across Canada who frequently work with athletes with visual disability or lack of vision, total lack of vision. Comes to mind Mohamed Soalmia from Jikan Judo Club in Montreal, who actually right now works with a number of blind athletes whom I'm trying to attract to join the Paralympic program. Those are younger people than what we have right now in our program, and hopefully they will represent Canada in the future. Shirin Elmayegi from Prince Albert Judo Club worked for years with blind athletes, and she probably has a lot of experience. Johannes Schenk from British Columbia, Ginny Xiang from British Columbia, also they work regularly with one of our athletes, and few other coaches. I may not be aware of many other coaches who are working with blind judoka, because again, we do not have that much of information. By the way, last year, Judo Canada asked all the members of our community, judo clubs, to register in our membership database, whether you have visual impairment or not. And we identified 25 individuals who identified themselves as visually impaired. However, whether this is going to result in increase in our program participation depends on a variety of factors, and I'll talk about those factors a little bit later on. I should also mention Laurie Wilshire, who is also with us today and who is a phenomenal participant in our program. She is one of the reasons why Priscilla Gagne is where she is today, as a #1 ranked athlete in the world in her weight division. And the fact that she was able to win medals in World Championships and medal in the Paralympic Games is greatly credited to Laurie's involvement in the process of her training and preparation, direct preparation in the competition, and servicing with her body as a sparring partner and throwing dummy for Priscilla. Resources that you can find about blind judo and Paralympic sport in general. The best resource or the most extensive resource is offered by the International Blind Sport Association website. The second best result, as I learned from my colleagues from international judo community, is Judo Canada website. We offer more information and more materials than anybody else on this topic, and I take full credit for it. And you should know that judo is one of the 3 IPSA, International Blind Sport Association sport, offered in the Paralympic program. Beside judo, there is goalball and blind football. There is several other sports that are part of the International Blind Sport Association, but they are not included in the Paralympic program. So those are the resources available. I will also have another slide at the end of the presentation with more links to different resources. What is classification? Classification is the evaluation of visual acuity of a person and whether they belong in the Paralympic program or not. Until December 31st, 2021, the visual classification was different. What you see today on the slide is the current classification of judoka. Until that year, until the Paralympic Games in Tokyo, the classification was scheduled as such as B1, B2, B3. B1 was fully blind, B2 visually impaired, significantly visually impaired, B3 marginally visually impaired. And the B3 standard was practically consistent with the standard for visual impairment in Canada. So it was approximately 20 by 200 in standard system, or it's different in the logmar. However, during that time, until 2021 Olympic Paralympic Games, all of those athletes, whether they were blind or just slightly visually impaired, competed against each other in one system. So that resulted in dramatic dropout of blind athletes from the Paralympic judo program, and Paralympic judo program faced elimination from the Paralympic Games because all the other sports complained that Paralympic judo is not really Paralympic judo. The fact is that in Tokyo, number of gold medals were won by athletes who, prior to joining Paralympic stream, won medals in major international competition in able-bodied judo, and they just, because they had glasses on, decided to join Paralympic stream, and they competed against people who really didn't have much of a chance to compete against them. Good illustration of that reality, that unfair reality that existed until 2020, is that when the Paralympic judo started in 1988, the majority of the gold medals and majority of medals in general were won by Japan. Obviously, they were as dominant in Paralympic judo as they were dominant and are dominant in able-bodied judo. Illustration of how unfair the system became is that in Tokyo, in their backyard, in their home, the Paralympic judoka from Japan won 2 bronze medals and were completely eliminated. The reason for it is Japanese are honorable people. They don't cheat. So they didn't introduce into the Paralympic program athletes who don't belong there. And many other nations didn't have that hesitation, and they just went for the medals. Anyway, today's classification looks like it is. Blind judoka J1, those are people who have no vision or very, very minimal vision. It's 20 by 7,962. That means that what you can see without glasses, well, when you have 20/20 vision, the blind athlete would not see. What you would see with perfect vision, it will be almost 8 kilometers away from you. And J2, visually impaired judoka, who are classified now as J2, are former B2 standard minimum, which is in our system used in Canada, 20 by 400. So if you have a judoka who is legally blind in Canada. That doesn't mean that person is going to be eligible to join the Paralympic program. This new classification has been established based on over 5 years of research done by university in Amsterdam in Holland, and the research concluded that judoka who are legally blind in most of the countries of the world, but minimally visually impaired, are able to compete in able-bodied judo without much of advantage to the able-bodied judoka, because it's a contact sport. We have a grip on, etc., etc. The minimally visually blind, visually impaired people can compete against the able-bodied athletes at equal grounds. That was the conclusion of the research, and 5 years long research and a lot of consultation with the blind judo community across the world, etc., etc. So this is the new reality. So if you have an athlete who is legally blind, I would gladly get information about that athlete and share with that athlete information what needs to happen, what kind of medical documentation is needed to start the process of classification and determine whether that individual would be able to compete in Paralympic judo. Long-term development judoka. I always put this slide in just for fun, but also to inspire reflection, because in judo we are being forced to produce long-term development plan with a lot of emphasis on talent identification, etc., etc. And I like to introduce this slide to our partners, to Sport Canada, to OTP, who are always very big on data, on analytics, etc. And I say, well, this is the reality of judo. We have this many body types in judo, and just tell me, how do we define talent identification that is so emphasized in sports like rowing, like cycling, where the talent identification is relatively easy. In our sport, the complexity of our sport and the complexity of body types and complexity of mental abilities is huge. And for that reason, this is a very, very challenging process to find a talent identification system. Now, on top of that body type, now you have visual impairment and variety of levels of visual impairment and variety of reasons for visual impairment. So think about it when you are talking about long-term development of judoka. This graph is a general model of developmental pathway of judoka from entry into the sport, into the fit for life part of our involvement in our sport. It applies to a certain extent to judoka with visual impairment and blind, but not fully. As opposed to having this long pathway of development from active start through fundamentals, through learn to train stage, and then joining the systemic preparation for a competitive development of our athletes in the able-bodied sport. In the Paralympic judoka development pattern, what I've concluded is we have only 2 stages. The start, which is familiarization of judo, and it may happen at any time of life of the judoka, as opposed to trying to get judoka, able-bodied children early into judo, etc., etc. For the visually impaired, their involvement in our sport can happen at any time of their life. And probably the best example is Priscilla Gagné, who joined the Paralympic judo at the age of 23. And now, being 38 years old, she is a Paralympic silver medalist and twice World Championships medalist. By the way, Priscilla Gagné is blind and not congenitally blind, but she was the only blind athlete who competed for a gold medal in Tokyo. All the other gold and silver medalists were either B3s or some B2s, and only 3 more blind athletes won bronze medals in the Paralympic Games in Tokyo. So performance by Priscilla was really exceptional, and we should be very proud of it as a nation. And obviously, we should be proud that we were able to help this phenomenal athlete to become this successful. The second step in the development of Paralympic judoka is stay and succeed. And Paralympic Judoka, at this moment, I do not refer only to those who compete at the international stage for medals, but everybody who is visually impaired or blind and participates in our sport, regardless of what are the goals that that person sets for themselves. And again, I'm not going to read everything. You are going to have access to all of this information later on, if you wish to review the materials. But the entry, I just quoted example of Priscilla Gagné, of the athlete into our Paralympic stream, can be at very different, maybe very different from what you experience in able-bodied sport. So as coaches, instructors, we have to be ready for it and prepare. I often have a discussion with my colleagues at the National Training Center, with coaches at the National Training Center who do not fully comprehend or do not like to comprehend or are not interested in it, what it means to work with athletes with visual impairment or athletes who are blind. And I like to introduce this to you for your reflection on life of a person who is blind, in particular, a person who are blind, because those who are visually impaired may not suffer the same kind of consequences of their slight sensomotor reality. We are visual species, and we designed our world for ourselves, for every reason, to suit our needs, our whatever we like. You know, we think always with a vision of what we want to accomplish. Our homes, our streets, our reality, everything is designed for us. Now, if you do not have the sense of vision, then you cannot differentiate between so many things that we take for granted. And as coaches and instructors of people who are visually impaired, I always refer people to this kind of reality. Think about what is happening in the life of the person whom you are working with, and only then you will be able to address their needs appropriately. Otherwise, if you take for granted what we know and what we see, then you are missing the point of how to address the needs of the athlete who doesn't have access to the same kind of information we have. And also just few examples, and examples that I have experienced working with athletes, walking with athletes, guiding athletes, and you know, the low tree branch hanging too low, and us walking and just passing it with our heads under, and they are just walking straight into it. And if you are working with athletes, you have to be aware of this kind of reality and have to try to address it to the best of your ability. What and why? The reduced vision or blindness caused by damage to the eye structure, optical nerves of visual pathways, or visual cortex of the brain. So this is the definition used by International Paralympic Committee to determine whether an athlete is eligible to participate in the Paralympic stream of competition. So the fact that somebody loses a vision, like I do right now at my stage of life, stage of development, which is quite late, even if I was losing my vision beyond the level of legal blindness in Canada, I'm still not eligible to compete in Paralympic Games, even if I wanted. Visual impairment may be congenital or acquired. Majority of the people involved in our sport have acquired visual impairment, but there are several athletes competing at the international stage with congenital blindness, which means they were born without vision. And as coaches and instructor, we have to be aware of that reality, whether the congenital it's acquired or congenital vision impairment, because the congenital vision impairment will result in variety of different additional challenges that you as instructor and coaches will have to face with the athlete. For example, acquired visual impairment, Tony Wolby can mentally rehearse judo movement because he was seeing everything and he still remembers everything. He may have certain challenges that come over time, that different application of different technical solutions, tactical solutions are no longer, he is no longer able to visualize it, is no longer able to visualize what is happening in today's judo at the international stage because of change of regulations. But still, a mental rehearsal for somebody who has acquired visual impairment, it's possible. For the person who had congenital visual impairment, that is something that is not available to them. There are several medical conditions that we as coaches and instructors must be aware of when we are working with athletes of visual impairment. And I'm not going to read this. You can reach back to this presentation and get familiar with those. This is not exhaustive list of visual reasons for visual impairment. There is over 400 different conditions that ophthalmologists are referring to when they're talking about visual impairment or reason for blindness. But those are the most common: glaucoma, genetic retinal disease, and diabetic retinopathy. And what they result in. What is something that we have to be aware again as coaches, that disruption of circadian rhythm, which is the rhythm of sleep and being aware, being awake. Many athletes with visual impairment, actually many athletes, almost everybody who has congenital blindness has this challenge, and it is particularly important to remember about that when working with athletes at the Paralympic level and traveling to different time zones, because they will have a much greater challenge to readjust to time zones as in comparison to the able-bodied athlete who can detect the light. Risk of dehydration much greater in visually impaired and blind athletes for a variety of reasons, but very easy check. What we always recommend to our athletes who can see. Check their color of their urine, and they will know whether they are dehydrated or not. Well, in advance of feeling dehydrated. Risk of retinal detachment, that is high risk, and we cannot determine it as coaches. We have to have clearance for athletes to participate in our sport from medical professionals. From instructor and coach perspective, very important information is here. Energy expenditures of athletes who are visually impaired and blind is much greater in the same kind of regular exercises that we are applying to judoka on a regular basis, to able-bodied judoka. And that is the result of the residual muscle tension that the blind and visually impaired is always going to keep. If you observe a blind athlete, in particular in randori, when they are competing around other couples that are fighting and they are able-bodied. This is the case of our National Training Center in Montreal, where we have 2 or 3 or 4 sometimes blind people on the mat, and you can see their heads and body rigid on the swivel all the time because they're afraid that they're going to be hit from behind, from the side, etc. They don't see, they listen. And they, the greater the number of people on the mat, the greater confusion that the other sensory systems in their body is throwing at them. So that results in greater level of fatigue, much faster level of fatigue. So as coaches, instructors, we have to remember about that to make sure that we address this kind of challenges in training. We cannot treat those athletes the same way as we treat able-bodied athletes. And walk asymmetry. This is very common in athletes with congenital blindness. You can see it immediately as individual who learned how to walk properly, that many athletes who are blind, born blind, are not walking the same way as you do, as I do, and you have to recognize that biomechanical reality in judo, because they will not be able to do many things that we take for granted that should be done relatively easy. On the flip side of that, we have to remember as coaches and instructors that the visually impaired person adapts. Deprivation of some sensory sensations results very often in better awareness in different systems like hearing. For example, a blind athlete at the National Training Center can hear and determine the discussion that is going on the other side, 30 meters away, between 5 or 6 people talking, and other 40 or 50 people doing randori at the same time on the mat in between the blind person and the people talking. So if you ever see athletes who are blind working with today's technology, with iPhones, and you can hear how they talk to the iPhone and how the iPhone talks to them, the speed of speech that can be adjusted on the iPhone is such that for us, people who are not visually impaired or blind, what we can hear is R2D2, and they hear words, and they discuss with the iPhone what is not available to us. So be aware of that. Be aware of the fact that most visually impaired people want to live independent life, and we never should take for granted anything. We always should ask the athlete, what do you think? What do you feel? Can I help you? Do you need help, etc., etc. Do not take for granted that they need anything from us, because most of the time they will refuse. We are at 35 minutes. I scheduled this to last for 1 hour and a half. I don't want to take more time from your busy schedules, in particular Saturday morning. Do we need 5 minutes break? If I don't see Frank giving me a tip that yes, then I'm going to continue. Coaching tips for all of us for Paralympic sport are no different than any coaching tips that I'm offering to coaches when I run coaching courses for able-bodied coaches and for coaches of able-bodied athletes. I think that the qualities that the Coaching Association of Canada is trying to impose on our national coaching certification programs, the competencies, problem solving, critical thinking, interaction, and leadership, they're as important for the Paralympic coaches, instructors, actually they're more important for the Paralympic coaches and instructors than for coaches of able-bodied athletes, because you have to add the layer of interaction, the layer of problem solving that you will not have to face working with able-bodied athletes, and you will have to address the needs of the individuals, special needs. This is new. I added this because we had OTP as the On the Podium organization that offers financial support to athletes with potential to win medals at the Olympic and Paralympic Games. And as soon as Priscilla Gagné is the only one in our program right now who meets the standards of support from the OTP. So On the Podium has consultants that are visiting our Paralympic athletes on semi-regular basis. And at one of the visits, a recent visit at the National Training Center, the new chair or director of the Paralympic Development Programs for Canada, we met, and he said he's a person who is a wheelchair, former coach and former Paralympic athlete, former coach of the Paralympic basket team, male. And he watched a full training session of Priscilla at the National Training Center, and Priscilla and Justin Karn, who were at that time there. And he detected that my main job was to make sure that Priscilla does randori and Justin does randori, that they are safe and there is nobody colliding with them. And I already reflected on that reality of the Paralympic judoka, who is always afraid of being injured, because that happened. And once you experience that, you remember forever that this may happen again, over and over again. And this is no different for able-bodied athletes. In the reality of judo, we have to practice together with several different couples fighting at the same time in relatively small space, and collisions are going to happen and are happening. But again, when you are blind and you don't see the reality of able-bodied judoka, but you were injured once, you will remember that forever, and you will always associate the danger of doing something in close proximity of other people that may result in injury. So it's something to remember for coaches and instructor of visually impaired. athletes that this is something to pay attention to. That's part of the safe environment that we have to offer to our athletes, which sometimes is relatively easy, sometimes is very difficult, sometimes is very challenging. Know your athlete. This is no different for anybody. That's one of the principles of the National Coaching Certification Program, that knowing your athlete and knowing the needs of the individuals is absolutely essential in creating safe and successful environment for their development, regardless of whether they are doing the sport for pleasure, for social connection, or for high performance. Participant-centered approach. It's a slogan that we use all the time, but that means participant, not system-centered. That means when we come to our dojos and we have, on the wall, most of the dojos in Canada have either the old Gokyo proposed over 100 years ago by Japanese, or the most recent Judo Canada, grading syllabus that is slightly different than the Gokyo for a reason. We often run our programs based on what is on those pictures there, not based on what are the needs of our participants in the program. And this is the biggest challenge, in my opinion, biggest challenge in judo, because we are highly traditional sport, highly hierarchical, and it's not easy to depart from the existing patterns and adjust it to the reality of each participant. It's very difficult, actually. The fact is that it is difficult, but that's what our job is. And when you are dealing with visually impaired and blind athletes, that becomes absolutely paramount, that you have to address those needs. General principles of the safe environment are relatively similar to what we have to offer to all participants in our sport programs, regardless of their special needs or not, except support needs. Actually, support needs is the new term used by the Canadian sport community in terms of, instead of special needs, support needs are well understood by all participants in the program. So if you have visually impaired blind person in your dojo, all the other participants who are not visually impaired needs to be aware of that reality, and they also are responsible for making sure that the environment is as safe as possible for all the participants, including those who require those support needs. Inclusive. The last principle of safe environment, it means not that, okay, you can be here. Inclusive means you are welcome here, you are part of us, you are part of our family, and not, bystander and the sore thumb outside of the group of people who have full visual capacity. Support needs and the sport environment. Familiarization with the dojo. In one of the materials available on Judo Canada website, there is IPSA produced 25 minutes long video that offers a very good and very specific information on, or actually it's a video information, visual information, obviously, to how to familiarize the blind person with the dojo, what needs to happen. Important things that you need to remember as coach instructor when you have athletes: designate sighted person who will assess the VI in case of emergency. Designate, don't wait until something happens and it's too late. Designate a willing training and sparring partner. My experience working with the Paralympic program is that this is the most important part if you are talking about potentially developing a successful athlete for international competition. Without good sparring partner, it's almost impossible. I cannot imagine that it can happen. Again, I will quote Priscilla Gagne's experience when she came to Ottawa after 2 years of training judo in dojos in Sarnia and Barrie, Ontario. She came to Ottawa with yellow belt. And when she was in Barrie and Sarnia, she had a rudimentary understanding of judo, working with male coaches mostly, who were her sparring partners and her guides, and dedicated a lot of time and very good involvement with her, and brought her to the level of judo that she was able to come to Takahashi Dojo, which she did voluntarily by herself, not invited by anyone, and showed up at the dojo with yellow belt or orange belts. I was part of that dojo. I am part of that dojo, although not visiting it frequently now. But at that time I did. Tony was also part of that program and already involved in the Paralympic program. That was pretty much the reason I was offered that position, because I was, again, just like in the past, already working with visually impaired and blind athletes in my dojo, and it just happened that I was employed by Judo Canada, and I formerly coached the national team. So it's coincident that it just happened to me. But again, Priscilla came there, and there was Natalie Gosselin, former Olympian and mother of Ben Kendrick, and she was in the dojo very frequently, and she became the first and the most important sparring partner in Priscilla's development, because the first 2 or 3 years of her journey with Paralympic judo happened because she was training very regularly with Natalie, and Natalie was able to guide her and the progress of her judo capacity from that moment on became very, very rapid. So another example of how important it is, designate a willing training and sparring partner. They make a huge difference in the life of visually impaired and blind judoka. Safety consideration for coaches are no different than for any other job in judo. Keeping our participants safe is our primary objective and job when we are on the mat and outside of the mat. Create environment that is psychologically safe. That is extremely important, because as much as everyone is, we are all emotional beings, and we react different way to the different circumstances. You have one sensor ability less, and visual is the most important, in my opinion. Now, in my experience, and let's say it this way, because opinion doesn't matter in this particular case, but emotional impact on variety of circumstances that are going to happen in your programs is huge on athletes who are visually impaired and blind. When you listen to athletes and you hear what they say, and once you are familiar enough, once you are friendly enough, once they are part of your family, they will open up to you and they will tell you what they feel and how they feel about a variety of different situations. And that's very important. Very important and also very rewarding. In my personal experience, I have to share with you very genuinely that involvement with the Paralympic program changed me as a person and changed me as a coach dramatically. I haven't expected that when I started the job. And I'm grateful for this experience, because it opened my mind to a completely different dimension of life. And it will happen to many of us if we are involved in working with special needs or support needs populations. It may not be only blind, because right now, another program that is dramatically increasing in numbers across the world is working with athletes with intellectual disability. Okay, we are at don't remember what slide it is, but probably at the middle of the presentation.
It's slide 25 you're on.
Yes, I see it now. Thank you. Teaching. And I will go through it very fast because we are all experienced coaches. And again, you will have this presentation online, access to it, and you can reach for it at any time you need. Know your athlete again. Know your athlete's medical condition. Know your athlete's goals, and don't hesitate to ask for goals, because we take for granted that know what athletes want, but that is not the case. You may have people who just come for social interaction there. You may have people who are coming for physical fitness. You may have people who like to compete and want to compete from the very beginning and ask questions. And don't hesitate to re-ask those questions because their goals may change after a while of involvement in judo. And that happened also very often. Know your athlete's physical capacity. And this is a little bit of a challenge because it requires a lot of experience, a lot of maturity, and ability to use common fitness tests to determine where they are in comparison to other participants in the program. Now, if you are familiar with Judo Canada manuals for U8, U10, U12, they are being revised now, but we are offering fitness tests there that also offer standards that are based on hundreds of thousands, if not millions of examples from different sports. Now, we offer that regardless of the fact that today's sport environment in Canada is suggesting not to use any fitness standards, that everybody is equal, etc., etc. At the same time, if we are coaches and if we are instructors and we are working with young generation, we need to know where they are in comparison to the general population. So those standards that we are proposing in Judo Canada syllabus and in those manuals in the long-term development model, which is, by the way, available on Judo Canada website, you can use as coaches and instructors to just gain the understanding where the individuals in your programs are, both able-bodied or visually impaired, doesn't matter. If you learn that they're in the top 80 percentile of the population in terms of fitness level at their stage of development, at their age, then you are talking about potential athletes. When you are gauging that understanding on fitness level of your athletes, and you figure out or find out from the tests that they're at 30% or 40% of in comparison to the general population, then you should know as coach and instructors that those individuals are probably never going to be able to compete successfully in any environment beyond regional or perhaps provincial. So that's just general information. Know your athletes. The teaching and learning principles that are no different from what we are suggesting in our national coaching certification program. The competence, confidence, connection, and character are the 4 C's that are being promoted in our national coaching certification program. Now, the 5th C that I add on top of that is care. And that should be applied to everybody, but it is absolutely essential to apply when you are working with athletes of additional needs. Teaching tips. Know your athletes again. And now, most of us coaches who were educated in the past few decades, we learned about so-called learning styles. That is no longer part of the vocabulary in teaching or learning, etc. The research that has been conducted over the past 20 years, research that involved measuring the wavelengths of brain activity, etc. So something that is not available to us, but that has been conducted, determined that learning styles don't exist. That something that has been promoted for such a long time and to which knowledge we all were subjected to is not valid knowledge. That if we can talk about kinesthetic, auditory, and visual, we can consider it as teaching tips, but not as learning styles. And that's why I included this, because included this slide, because I know that majority of us, including myself, until very recently, and even our manuals, the National Coaching Certification Program promoted the so-called learning styles. And we were recently contacted by Coaching Association of Canada and asked to change that terminology in our manuals, which just happened very recently. But that is a good information that I'm sharing with you. Now, when you are working with visually impaired and blind athlete, kinetics and kinematics are the most important parts that you are going to use in your teaching. For those who do not have congenital or who are not fully blind, some visual teaching tips are beneficial, but again, what they feel is the most important part. That's why, again, having a good sparring partner, good teaching partner is absolutely essential for the blind and visually impaired. The challenge zone, that's all we know. We don't want to see boredom and we don't want to see anxiety. Now, it's very rarely that I experience boredom with visually impaired. The visually impaired and blind athletes, if they are involved, they are involved. They really want to learn, and they are open-minded and willing and enthusiastic, and on top of everything, appreciative of what is being offered to them. But I've seen anxiety that comes from the fact that they not always feel welcome, not always feel emotionally connected with the rest of the group, and not always feel safe in the environment that is offered to them. So our job is to make sure that we reduce that anxiety to the maximum level possible. Choice of activities, no different than for any able-bodied athletes. Start with activities that require the highest neuromuscular coordination, continue with activities that require less and less and less, and then finally finish with activities that are strictly muscular endurance and cardiovascular endurance, etc. So those are coaching tips for every coach. This is part of our national coaching certification program now, that we ask coaches to run practices according to this paradigm, not reversed paradigm, which very often in the past was used. For example, starting training sessions with muscular endurance, cardiovascular endurance exercises like, for example, Newaza Randori, reduces the capacity of the individual to learn new skills after that. So again, this is part of our national coaching certification program, but for those of us who took the NCCP many years ago, this may not be something that you are familiar with. So I suggest you reach back if you need to refresh your knowledge on this. Coaching duties, very specific. Explain and demonstrate. Objective 1 to maximum 2 key points. This is, again, a principle that we are trying to communicate in our coaching programs at any level to any coach. We're always guilty of overdoing it as teachers. Not always, but too often. We are putting too much attention to too many details, which confuses the big picture, and the person who is learning is not able to digest what we are proposing to them. In demonstration for visually impaired and blind athletes, the demonstration has to happen to them and on them. And they have to be cognitively involved in what is happening to them. They have to understand what and why is happening. If this is not communicated clearly to the visually impaired and blind athlete, they will learn by feeling, and the learning process is going to be extensively longer than needed. Once they get cognitively involved, then it is going to become forever easier for them to actually do it right. And all other principles start with general, leave the details for later, which is contradictory to what we traditionally do, because traditionally we said when you learn something wrong, it's very difficult to unlearn it. But again, judo offers so many details. Every technical aspect can be so detailed oriented that overdoing those details is confusing the big picture. So as long as something works, in particular for the blind and visually impaired, pay attention to the big picture. As long as it is safe, don't over detail the need for executing something. I will give you an example. When I'm trying to teach new skill to visually impaired athlete, and I see, for example, athletes that technical skill like Uchimata, Haraigoshi, or Ashiguruma, similar techniques biomechanically, very very similar to each other. but very often the athlete is not properly positioning their supporting leg in the picture, because for their own safety, they feel that they have to support their own body weight always in the center of the gravity, as opposed to in those particular throws, when you have to offset your own balance in order to generate force necessary to throw your opponent. So if that happens, eventually what my solution to it was, I forbid the athlete to actually try to engage their legs in that action. I asked them to do it only with their arms, and it started to work eventually. So example of finding a solution to a problem that traditionally we would never look for in our teaching methodology with able-bodied athletes. General tips for instructors, and again, I'm going through it very quickly. Again, it will be available to you online later on if you are interested. Patience. Keep your mind and heart open. That's one thing that I've learned, that if you have your mind open but not heart, first of all, you are never going to emotionally connect with the athletes who are of special needs, and they will feel it. As much as we think that we are polite and professional, etc., emotional connections with people is absolutely essential. And as much as able-bodied athletes, sighted people are going to react to the connection, it is not going to come to at the same level of, not as extensively as with visually impaired and able-bodied. Again, as I said earlier, the appreciation that comes from visually impaired and blind individuals that they show you is much greater than you can expect from able-bodied athletes. Willing partner, the most important part, again, I re-emphasize that, willing partner, not just somebody who is going to do it because you ask them. You have to look for people who have the natural level of empathy, and not just empathy. I speak later about compassion. Compassion is the next level that has to come after empathy. You see a person of needs and you understand them, that's one thing. But seeing a person of needs and making something to make sure that their needs are addressed, that's compassion. And that's what Laurie Wilshire, for example, demonstrated. That's why she was invited to be part of the Paralympic program, that she was with us in World Championships and Olympic Games. And hopefully, if her body can hold on another challenging year of being thrown, perhaps she is going to again join Priscilla Gagne in Paris. I'm not going to read the rest of the principles. Again, it is going to stay at your disposal. General tips, that's something that I've learned that I didn't know, but and it is not universally applied across the world. There are a few athletes who are actually congenitally blind. And by the way, starting as of January 1st, 2022, when the new classification has been introduced, the number of blind athletes in the International Blind Sport Association database quintupled. So what we had in the past, that very, very few B1 athletes were participating in the Paralympic stream, now only 1 year after the new classification has been introduced, there is more blind athletes than visually impaired athletes in the Paralympic stream. That means that the blind athletes were always there, but they were just blocked by people who were marginally visually impaired, and they weren't able to compete in international competition because they had able-bodied competitors replacing them in their own countries. So that was just a digression. Avoid the very high level of hand-eye coordination and leg-eye coordination movements, in particular if the athlete starts judo later in their life. In general, knowledge that I learned from Japanese teachers and coaches, they state that if you don't get a child before the age of 12 in judo, don't even try to teach them techniques that require hand-eye coordination because they will never be able to do it properly, which is actually consistent with our understanding of the ABCs, the motor skills, the agility, balance, and coordination that are the most at its most capacity at very early stages of development, which means children between the age of 6 and 12. So that is consistent with what the Japanese are teaching about hand-eye coordination techniques. Another digression, one of the first very strong female Japanese able-bodied judoka, who was Yoko Tanabe, who was the first, actually not the first, but one of the first Olympic medalist for Japan, because initially when female judo was introduced, Japan was not the strongest country in female judo. It was Great Britain, Australia, Austria, France, and United States that dominated, but it took the Japanese female program 10 years to become the dominant. Actually, Cuba was another country that was very strong on the female side. But Tanabe started judo at the age of 18, and she was one of the people whom I've had a chance to meet and talk about judo. And she told me that in Japan, when you do not start the ashibara, ouchigari under the age of 12, coaches don't touch it later on. They just don't teach that to more mature athletes. Tips, something that I've learned, and please pay attention to it when you have blind and visually impaired. Make very clear, comments on the mat. You know, rolling forward to the left, to the right, with 2 steps in between. That's something that they will hear and understand, and they will do it. Is there anything else on this particular page that I would like to re-emphasize? No, there is not. Essential tips. Other than that, some of them that I've learned over the past 10 years. Life skills. If you have judoka, a visually impaired and blind, who is well aware of their reality of life, like for example Tony Wolby is. It's much easier to work with that judoka and expect that they are going to be successful in the Paralympic stream if they are competing in the Paralympic stream. Level of anxiety that surrounds life of people with visual impairment and blind, it's probably much greater than level of anxiety of people who are not. And I cannot, definitively state that, but my experience is that working with athletes like Tony did not add the additional layer of challenges and anxiety that I've experienced working with a few other athletes who did not understand well their position in life. And what I'm talking about life skills is external support, as well as ability to recognize their own limitations or level of ability. It's very common that athletes with visual impairment or blind athletes will evaluate themselves in a very, very different mirror than what a person, able-bodied person, is able to do when they look at their own capacity. So be aware of that. Be aware of the fact that in Canada, because of the lack of numbers in visually impaired environment, which by the way is not the case. For example, Brazil has several hundred of blind and visually impaired judoka, and they have regular national level championships for every weight division, and they have quite significant competition domestically, and very regular competition domestically. In our reality, if our visually impaired athletes are competing, they have to compete against able-bodied athletes, and this is what we are asking you as coaches and instructor to do. If they are interested in competition, they have to compete according to visually impaired regulations, and you have to find athletes who are willing to do that. You have to find able-bodied athletes who are going to apply the regulation, the grip on, etc., etc., and and live with the consequences of that without being, traumatized by the fact that they may lose to somebody who is blind, which, by the way, happens once you apply visually impaired rules and a blind person competes against able-bodied athletes. Then the able-bodied athletes is at this point of time at disadvantage because they cannot rely on tactical solutions that they use in able-bodied judo. So make sure that it is legal in your jurisdiction. In Judo Canada tournament sanctioning policy, we have this clearly spelled out that when visually impaired athlete steps in on the mat, the visually impaired rules apply. And if the person who is not visually impaired doesn't want to compete according to those rules, that person is disqualified. That is the only way we can develop a Paralympic program in Canada, if we are talking about competitors. The other suggestion I will throw here in is that if somebody is of a senior age already, they can compete against junior age athletes, but if that happens, then parents of those junior age athletes would have to sign a consensus that they agree to that. So be aware of that as well. Once judoka are involved in a high performance stream, like those 12 athletes I talked about that were representing Canada at the international stage, they have to be treated like any other elite athlete, providing that their needs are met. And that means all the needs. Again, I'm bringing now example of Tony, bringing example of Justin Karn, example of Priscilla Gagne. They are aged athletes already. They are in their late 30s or early 40s or late 40s, like Tony Wolby, who competed recently in the Para-Pan Championships in Edmonton. And they cannot train like athletes who are in their late teenage years and early 20s. So those are the daily training environment conditions that you have to be aware of as coach and instructor. Communicating with the VI athlete. Take nothing for granted, first of all. When you talk to somebody and they don't react, slight touch on the shoulder is how you need to start the conversation with. When you are approaching a group of blind people, don't approach them and surprise them with your presence there. Just well in advance tell them I'm coming. And if they know you, they will hear your voice. If they know you very well, they will hear you coming because they recognize your movement pattern. And but until that moment happens, always make sure that they are aware that somebody else is coming. Do not pay attention to facial expressions of visually impaired person because many of them did not learn facial expression that is based on visual cues. So they may react sometimes. They will have facial expression that for you means something that doesn't mean anything to them. Voice intonation is very important. Those are cues that the VI athlete is going to read much better than able-bodied athletes. So you may sound polite, but if you are not friendly, they will know it, and they will know immediately that you are not in their corner, that you are just there as a professional or whatever, but not really ready to give them the support they need. Very good tip that I've learned from the athletes. I always used in the past or able-bodied judo, informed athletes at 30 degrees, 45 degrees, 90, 180. Blind people are communicating with the clock face, which imagine the clock, you have 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4, 5, 6, and that's how they react to information much better. So if you are asking to do a sotogari and your leg has to go at 1 or between 1 and 2 o'clock to the right, they will understand it. If you tell them 15 degrees or 20 degrees to the front, they may not be able to read that information at all. So it's a tip that I've learned, and it works very well. The same when you're servicing your athletes, for example, food. Blind people, I will talk about it later on actually, but If you put a plate in the front of them and you tell them at 3 o'clock you have potatoes, at 6 o'clock you have your broccoli, at 9 o'clock you have your piece of chicken, and at 12 o'clock in the front of the plate you have a glass of water, they know exactly what everything is. Otherwise, they don't. Traveling with VI athletes, and here I could write a book with a lot of funny stories, but I'm not going to expose you to more time than necessary. If we ever meet, I can share with you some stories, and Tony can share with them with so many. And sure, all athletes have the proper travel documentation with them. Don't take it for granted that they do. Always before you travel, you make sure that they will ensure proper hydration and scheduling for hydration. Don't assume that they are going to do it without being prompted until they are mature enough and experienced enough to do it on their own, like Tony, for example. Learn about eating habits. Sometimes some of the athletes that I had experience in our program were eating nothing but meat and potatoes, and they never touched vegetables and never touched a variety of foods. And how do you expect those people to become high performance athletes? It's impossible. So you learn and you try to propose, and perhaps they will learn. You do your best. In self-serving buffet settings, which is very common at international competitions, ensure that the athletes are capable of handling their own plates. If not, prepare the meals for them. So it's I've quite a few experiences that were quite funny and quite embarrassing, etc. Before I learned that it's much better to leave the blind athletes at the table and do it for them. Sometimes you, as a coach, when you have 3 or 4 athletes to service, and before you get to your own meal, the meal is over, so you are hungry, but that's okay as long as their needs are served. In hotels, when you go to the hotel, you guide the blind athlete first. Now, with the standards, safety standards regulations now, in the past, when I was traveling with our male athletes, we always stayed in the same room, so there was no challenge there. Now, coaches and athletes cannot stay in the same room, regardless of gender. So, but what your job is when you go to the hotel, you go with the athletes first to their room and show them everything what needs to be shown, because hotels are different. We had problems in the past with athletes starting, fire alarms, with drowning their bathrooms because they didn't know how to operate different systems, etc. So this kind of orientation in a new environment is absolutely essential, and you are responsible for it when you travel with athletes who are blind. Guiding the VR athlete. Do not offer uninvited assistance, the number 1 tip. Do not grab the VI athlete. Many of them are going to react in such a way they now learn self-defense. So if you grab their elbow, they're going to grab your arm and twist this arm because they feel threatened by that. Always ask first, and if they need assistance, you offer your elbow to the athlete, and the elbow you keep stiff, you keep at the same level, and they will walk with you holding your arm. And if you have more athletes than one, then they are going to hold each other's in a trained fashion, and that's how they operate. And you have to be aware of that. If you are the guiding person, ask whether they need guidance, and then offer it in a proper fashion. Communicate at all the time. When we are at any location that the athletes are not familiar with, when I'm with them and I know that they cannot see, I will practically, my tongue doesn't stop. We are just passing here. There is a tree on the right, there is a car on the left, there is a hole in the ground, etc., etc. We have beautiful buildings, we have beautiful mountains, beautiful trees, etc. So share with them what you see, and they appreciate that, I think, at least. Make sure that you do not make mistake. I made it once in Seoul with Tony Wolby, walking uphill, very, very, very high hill, which had very irregular steps. And when walking up, when athletes are using their canes, they are relatively safe to step up and up and up. But challenge came when we were walking down, because now we have thousands of steps to come down, and every step is different height and different width, etc. And I ended up with two blind athletes hanging on my two elbows. And at the end of that journey, I was so exhausted that I barely walked up to the elevator in our hotel, because they relied on me to make sure that they are safe when we are walking down on very irregular terrain. Okay, that's pretty much the end of those funny tips. Not all of them were funny when they were happening, but they're funny when you talk about it later. When you are a coach and you are an instructor, this is very common when you are when the blind athlete, visually impaired athlete walk into a new environment of able-bodied people, that many people consider that person as a charity case. They don't want to be considered as charity case. They want to be fully included and welcomed as full-fledged participants in the program. So they're not charity case. Tip 1, selecting a sparring partner. Look for judoka who are going to assist without being asked. And then look for those people who are going to show compassion without being asked to show compassion. Before they are good sparring partners, they have to be good guides, and you will see it immediately in your programs. By the way, in club environments, the environment that is friendly and great for inclusion, welcoming, empathy, compassion. In club environment, this is what I've experienced is relatively simple to accomplish. And where I experienced blind and visually impaired judoka in their clubs, they are happy people. They are not that happy when they are in high performance environment where they are surrounded by tons of mostly young and mostly selfish, and deliberately and necessarily selfish young athletes with goals of their own, who are not really interested in helping somebody else, but helping themselves. So it is not a surprise that the high performance environment is much less inclusive and friendly as we would hope for. Optimal training partner is a very good judoka, as already said earlier. Know your sport. Just as much as we need to know our athletes when we are coaches and instructors, we need to know our sport. And Paralympic judo is different from Olympic judo. And it looks similar, but when you look at the requirements for the Paralympic judoka, they are quite different on the physiological level, mental level, etc. Work to rest ratio, 4 minutes match is 4 minutes match, but the matches start with grip on. The work to rest ratio varies between 1 to 1, which means it's sometimes 5 seconds to 5 seconds. Sometimes it is 5 seconds on and 20 seconds off in some matches. Some athletes are going to drop down, and then there is mate and readjustment and putting the hands on the judogi before the next hajime. It's already 20 seconds past, and it's very common. So preparing athletes with blind and visually impaired athletes for competition requires different approach in training. They have to be trained in different capacities. Mental training, very important, obviously, like in able-bodied athletes, but to much greater extent. They have to feel safe, first of all, emotionally supported, etc. If they don't have support from the outside environment, then they are not going to perform well ever. Knowing opposition. Again, in visually impaired reality, the opposition is much smaller. In the world ranking, right now, in the world ranking list for weight divisions on the male side, in the classification J1, which is the blind, and the J2, on the male side, there is between 30 and 40 athletes in the world. And on the female side is between 20 and in some divisions less athletes at the world stage. So knowing the opposition is relatively easy if you are a coach. For me, when I was preparing Priscilla for the Paralympic Games, she had a very specific program for every single opponent that she was potentially facing in Tokyo, and very specific drills, and it was option A, option B, option C for every single one she faced, and she executed phenomenally. If you are not familiar with that, in her semi-final match, she was competing against German competitor who was twice Paralympic champion, and Priscilla competed against her 4 times in the past, lost every single time. And for the Paralympic Games, she was prepared in such a way that the German was completely unprepared for what she did, and she won that match with 2 Azaris in the 25 seconds. So knowing opposition is absolutely crucial, because again, as much as we expect the athlete to be independent, and as much as we expect them to find a solution during the competition, it is not as easy as it's said. And if you are a good coach and you have a good understanding of what needs to happen, then you can help your athletes to be really good. Not necessarily through randori, which is the free practice, but through very specific drills. And in my experience, drills for visually impaired and blind judoka are much more effective than randori is, for 2 reasons. One, they can focus on very specific tasks if you give them the specific tasks. And 2, they feel safe because they no longer have to worry about the fact that somebody doing randori around them is going to fall on them and hit them. So they can actually mentally focus on what needs to happen and do it right. The rest of the training, exactly the same as for the able-bodied athletes, focus on aerobic, anaerobic, everything has to be done. Again, knowing your athletes, you will know much better on what to need to focus on. For example, 2 examples of 2 female athletes we right now have in 57 kilograms had a very different capacities. Christina Moat is a different athlete than Priscilla Gagne. She needs different things than Priscilla Gagne. Her matches are going to be very different than Priscilla Gagne. Priscilla Gagne very often will fight 4 minutes and at very high level of intensity. Christina, at this stage of her development, is going to fight for 15 to 20 seconds most of the time. Most of her matches are finished by ippon, either for Christina or against Christina. So training must be different and address those needs of those athletes. Ultimate goals of mental training, no different.
Andrei?
Yes?
There was a question in the discussion asking for explanation. What is sutegeiko?
Sutegeiko is throwing technique, throwing practice. So a lot of throws, preferably on crash mats, not on regular mats. Particularly important for athletes who are aging or who are already at advanced age of competition, competitors who are of advanced age. So reduce the number of breakfalls as much as possible for those athletes. Sutegeiko on the crash mats. Can I continue?
Yes. Thank you.
Developing and maintaining focus and emotional stability. Athletes have to be made aware, in particular, because they are not exposed. They cannot be exposed. They have no ability to learn how to manage their emotional state, because they don't have the access to regular national level competitions. They start at the international level, and they experience stress. And they have to be made aware that stress is natural and everybody goes through it. They just have to take it in a very natural way. It helps them to manage it. If they are not aware in advance that they are going to feel butterflies and they are going to have diarrhea in very many circumstances, and they are not prepared for that, and they will not, this will derail their capacity to perform properly. I don't want to expand beyond this 1 hour 32 minutes. I have a few more slides and I will just run through it. very quickly. Before giving feedback, ask the participant how they feel about their performance. So instead of throwing at them information right away, ask them first, because this will give you tips on what they actually understand about their performance or lack of it. And this is true also, in my opinion, for able-bodied athletes. And we are very guilty as coaches very often to attack our athletes with tons of information immediately after they finish their performance. And at that point of time, majority of athletes, able-bodied or not, are not able to digest anything. Correction pyramid, another very basic principle of training and preparation of athletes. We very often focus on psychological, mental, tactical training, technical training, and finally, general physical preparation. But the correction of any problem should start from here, not from here. So general physical training should be the first thing to be addressed if you see that something is lacking. So if you see that somebody doesn't work in technical aspects of judo, whether, again, able-bodied or visually impaired, ask yourself and ask the athletes first whether they are able to actually physically handle what you are asking them to do. If they are not, don't focus on the technical training, because they will not be able to do it anyway if they are not physically ready. So the correction pyramid, start from the physical, then go to the technical, then tactical. Tactical at much reduced need for visually impaired, because they don't use the same tactical approach to judo as able-bodied athletes. Final coaching tips. Your approach has to vary, has to be individualized. Teaching individual visually impaired judoka very often will include management of other demands. So you'll be prepared to become a father, mother if needed from time to time, or the shoulder to cry on if needed. Competition intelligence is a very important factor, and that's it. Those are the tips that I will share with you, and you can reach out to it later on. This slide offers links to a variety of different resources. If you are interested in, you can always reach back to this presentation and connect. And that's a new slide that I just added a week ago, because this is new development. There is IPSA, International Blind Sport Association, anti-doping app that you can download on your iPhone, and it's an app that is going to offer to the blind and visually impaired information on prohibited substances, prohibited actions, etc., from the perspective of doping. And this information is very difficult to access, was very difficult to access for blind and visually impaired, because this information is readily available from the Canadian Blind Sport Association, from the Canadian Centre for Ethics and Sport, but it is not visually accessible for visually impaired and blind people. So now we have a tool that actually can offer the athlete information of whether what they are taking is legal or what to avoid, etc. So it's a new tool. I've downloaded it, and I asked my athletes to download it and check whether it is fully accessible. And that will conclude my presentation. We are actually exactly at 1 hour 30 from the moment when we started. I am so proud of myself. So
that's judo precision. Timing. Judo timing.
okay, I will pass the sharing. We should see now each other again, as opposed to my shared screen. So are there any questions or reflections or? perhaps we can.
My first question, Andre, is really actually, how do you pronounce your first name?
You did it quite well, so.
Andre?
Yeah, yeah. And
Okay.
because,
Okay, good.
I'm used to so many different pronunciation of my name in Canada that, I react to every.
Andre, so thank you very much for the presentation. I see opportunities there, even for recruiting training partners as well. I mean, we need training partners as well for these athletes as well. But I wanted to share something with you. I am currently hosting a self-defense program, which I like to call personal safety program. It's an introductory judo program, personal safety program. And in this class, I have 16 participants between the ages of 14-year-old female and 65-year-old male. The 65-year-old male has bilateral hip replacements, but he always wanted to do a martial art. And he's at the stage in our society where it's like, I feel like I need to know something. I feel like I need to be prepared for the street. And so he came into my introductory program, and he did well with some simple self-defense techniques. But then we got into some rolling break falls and whatnot, and he was unsure as to how to proceed because of his hip replacements. I said, well, we have one of the safest floors in the industry. We have crash mats, and it's up to you if you want to roll. And this 65-year-old man with bilateral hip replacements started doing rolling break falls, and he was ecstatic. He was so pleased with what he was learning. Like, he's ecstatic about being able to practice a martial art. So I just wanted to share that with you. Any thought, any feedback for me on that scenario? Incorporating individual, being the diversity and inclusion, being more inclusive, because coming back to what you said about selfishness in the sport and selfishness in society, a lot of people would tell me I can't practice judo because I'm just too old. I'm retired. I'm just too old for judo. But I think there's some judo for everybody potentially.
It's not subject of this presentation, but there is quite a few programs around the world right now that are offering judo for geriatric population, and we just have to apply the same kind of principles. Know your athletes, know their goals, and stay on the safe side. Judo has newaza, and newaza is safe to practice for majority of the people with variety of different conditions that are not able-bodied, fully able, or they are too old to. I in general do not recommend old people to take break falls because they are inherently dangerous. That's digression now. Now I'm digressing from today's presentation, but we are proudly referring to judo as one of the safest sports, etc., etc. The reality is judo is a very, very violent sport when it comes to impact on the body. We are not boxing. We are not hitting anybody's head, deliberately trying to force concussion on people, but we are falling. And the impact on falling, the impact on the musculoskeletal system is much greater than any impact of any punch. If you fall 20, 30, 40 times on the mat, your body produces so much enzymes to replace the damaged muscle tissue that if this is tested, and it was tested in many countries, the level of enzymatic activities in the muscles, people were taken to hospitals with suspicion of heart attacks because that's how much of enzymes was produced that was consistent with heart attacks, and so I'm not a recommended. I would never recommend to somebody who is this old and with prior injury to take a hard break falls. But obviously, what you suggested, those crash mats and gentle rolling, is something that obviously may help a person to feel safer in the environment.
Yeah, And I agree with you. I would never introduce this person into being thrown and break falling on a standard tatami. But you know what? They did the crash mat. They did their rolling break fall. This is an agile 65-year-old who rides bicycle. And you know what? He was just pleased with the level of athleticism he was able to achieve on his own terms, right? His own
Thank you very much.
voluntary practice.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. Stéphane Garin, this presentation is translated to French, and it is going to be available in French as well. Okay. Unfortunately, I could not share with you this in French, but the presentation itself is available in French.
No, it's okay. I understand the most
I
important.
know you do. I know you do.
No, thank you for the tip. Merci. Merci beaucoup.
Andres, I have a comment, if that's okay.
Tony.
Fantastic presentation, Coach. Sorry about Korea. I just want to say to all the other coaches out there that do not underestimate the capacity for the visually impaired and a blind person to adapt. I know Andres mentioned it earlier, but it goes within the Shiai too. And if you have a certain technique or strategy you want to teach them and you're getting frustrated with the way you're teaching them, ask them, A, if they understand what you're trying to show them, even through the tactile, and B, if they have a better idea of doing it. For example, I now compete in Kodokan Goshin Jitsu, and when I first started to learn how to do this kata, I had no idea how I was going to do this, but with our kata coach and with my partner, we figured out a way for how I was going to adapt to walk through it. So work with your athlete. If there's a certain thing you want them to do, take their advice too on how maybe best to achieve the goal. Thanks, Andres.
Thank you, Tony. Well, if there are no more questions, I really thank you for your interest in this topic, and I hope that we can together grow the adaptive judo, not just for visually impaired, but for people with other disabilities. And the principles of coaching and teaching will probably apply across the board. So thank you once again.
Thank you, Andre.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Have a great day. And Andre, if it's applicable, happy Father's Day.
Oh, thank you.
We all have a father somewhere in our life.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks, Andre.